Okay, we got started right. Okay, yes. Name again is Christina.
Oh, Rabbi Berman, are you going to record the session?
You didn't hear it go? I was so proud of myself. Yeah, I got you. You and Mary. I was complaining about the two of you turned sides of the table. I remember when I insult somebody, so I know. Okay. All right. As we continue along in the Torah portion of the week, we have one, actually, just about every one of Sefer Bereshit, the book of Genesis, are exciting stories and filled with all kinds of questions. We're told at the end of last week's Torah portion how Yitzchak, Isaac, finds a wife. His wife is Rebecca. So now we have two generations. We have Abraham and Sarah, and we have now Yitzchak, Isaac, and Rivka, Rebecca. Okay, so two of the patriarchs and two of the matriarchs. Okay, so they get married, or at least we're told that that's the circumstance. And then we're informed that Rivka has a hard time getting pregnant. That seems to be a common theme for heroic figures in the Torah, that their mothers have difficulty getting pregnant. That makes it more of a special circumstance when the child is born, right? So that motif reappears with a number of the heroes. Right? And the Torah says that both of them pray to God. And so finally, Rivka gets pregnant. And she's not very happy because something's going on. She's having a very difficult time. And the rabbis, playing on this and knowing what's going to happen later on, said that, well, she's told that she has twins in her. She's carrying twins. And one will, shall serve the younger. But it doesn't really clarify what it says is struggling in her womb or what have you. So the rabbi said whenever they would go past a place of avodah zarah, place of idol worship, Esau tried to get out, gave her a hard time. Whenever they passed a place of the worship of the one God, don't ask me how that could be at that time, but that's the Midrash. All right? Then Jacob wanted to get out. So they're going in different directions from pre-birth. And so when they're born, first comes Esav, and holding on to his heel, maybe trying to pull him back in so he can go out first, is Jacob. And the word Jacob, or Yaakov, derives from the word Akev. Akev means the heel, Heel. Heel of the foot, and it can mean to supplant somebody. Names in the Torah are always assumed to be meaningful. They're not there by accident, and they say something about the personality. And we're going to see that Jacob has to struggle with this aspect of himself. So we're not told anything beyond that, but then we have the next major episode. After we're told that Isaac loved Esau because of the game, the animals that he caught and killed were sweet in his mouth. And Rebecca loved Jacob more. He was a mama's boy, I guess. Okay. And so then we're told one day Jacob is cooking up a pot of lentils, and Esau comes in from the field, all hot and bothered. He was out hunting again, and he says to Jacob, "Give me of that red stuff, Adom Hazeh." And that's why he's called, another name for Esau is Edom. And he becomes the progenitor of the nation of Edom, which later in time is identified by the rabbis as Rome. And in later times, once Rome becomes Christian, it becomes identified with Christianity. Okay? You have to keep that in mind, because whenever the rabbis can find something nasty to say about Esau, they do. Why? Not because he necessarily thought Esau was such a horrible person, but they couldn't say in public that the Roman Empire stinks. Okay, or they couldn't say the Catholic Church is a pain in our rear ends. So he talked about Esau. Okay? So Jacob, now the firstborn son in the ancient world, this was universal, gets the big inheritance, right? So he was the firstborn is supposed to inherit the birthright. Whatever that exactly means is not 100% clear. So Jacob says, I will give you the porch only if you sell me the birthright. And so Esau says, I'm going to die sometime. What do I need this for? You can have it. So he sells it for a bowl of porridge. Then later on, as time goes by, I'm skipping a few stories, Isaac has gone blind. Now, those of us who are of a certain age know that cataracts have a tendency to form as we get older. And today we can get rid of the cataracts. I can see better today without my cataracts than I could before. I got better vision than I had a few years ago. But in those days, that's, there was a typical older age reality to have cataracts, or even worse, but it may have simply been cataracts, but he was blinded by it. Couldn't see very well. And he's afraid he's going to die soon. So he tells Esau, his oldest son, to go prepare game for him so he can give him his blessing. So Esau runs out, and Rebekah heard this, and she tells Jacob, you're going to have to take your brother's place. I will cook up a nice meal for daddy, and you will go in and pretend you're Esau. How can I pretend I'm Esau? He's a big, hairy man. I'm metropolitan man. Metro man, is that what it is? I don't know. Okay, I'm too old. Anyway, so she takes and gets some of Esau's clothing and puts it on Jacob, and takes a hide from a goat or sheep and puts it on his hands, so it's hairy and rough, and cooks up this nice meal and gives it to Jacob to bring in to his father. And Isaac's a little suspicious. First of all, it was a little too quick. Second of all, it just didn't, there was things going on that didn't make sense to him. And he says, oh no, I'm Esau. Isaac's come over, he touches his hands, and he hears his voice, and he says, Yadei Esav Kol Yaakov. I think I'm misquoting it a little bit. He says, the hands are the hands of Esau, but the voice is the voice of Jacob. So anyway, he eats. He's convinced at least enough to give the blessing to Jacob. Esau comes home, cooks up the meal, goes, brings it to his father, and he says, Father, I'm here. And Isaac, who are you? I'm Esau, your oldest son. Well, who was here before? So he says, bless me too. He says, I can't. These parts are sometimes very difficult to really understand completely, but he can't give him the blessing he gave Jacob. He gave him a different blessing. And Esau says, wait till daddy dies and I'll get my revenge. Rebekah hears this. She's worried about Jacob, who only did it because she insisted he do it. Right? He really struggled against it, but she insisted he do it. She even said, if there's a curse, the curse will be upon me. And so she tells Jacob he should go back to the land of her family to find a wife. And she tells Isaac that she's not happy with the wives that Esau already has, and says, I want Jacob to go back to my ancestral land, to my family, to find a wife. Right? So that's pretty much the bird's eye view of the Torah portion for this week. But something is very important for you to take note of. How is it that Jacob can fool his father? Keep that in mind for next week's Torah portion. Because we don't know what the Torah says about what Jacob did. He does it, gets away with it, it seems. So hold that in mind for next week, and we'll see what happens then. Okay. All right, so we didn't do any Hebrew last week, and we didn't Hebrew the week before, but we will do Hebrew tonight. So I did bring some extra copies if those of you don't have it with you. Does anybody else need a copy? Anyone else? We got that. Okay, let's see what we got. So where did we get up to? We got up to, we had Lamed, right, on page 15. We had Vav and let's say Elohim, right? So we're up to page 18, is that correct? Anybody remember? Can anybody read page 18? If you can, that means we got to go forward past there, huh? All right. So we'll assume we got up to page 18. Okay, the letter Nun. The letter Nun has the same value as in English, the letter N. Okay, it's always an N sound, but it is one of the letters that has a final form. So if you look at the top of page 18, you'll see there are two versions of the Nun. One version has a little leg coming at the bottom, and the other version, instead of making a perpendicular turn, it keeps going straight down. So the final Nun will only appear at the end of a word. The other form of the Nun will be at the beginning or the middle. Everybody got that? Any confusion? Okay, so no confusion. So Nu, let us go on with the letter Nun. Okay, so line number 1, we have no, na, ne, ne, nu, no, nun. Line number 2, ben, bane, loon, hone, no, noon. Okay, line number 3, baron, no, tain, renana, no, tenet. Again, we have that double segel. The two segels, that's why the accent shifts from the last syllable. And the last word is Elohai, my God, Elohai. Okay, line number 4. Banana habnanot lehachen letachen lehalan. Line number 5. Habaron tichonen batoren lachen lahen. Line number 6. El lo hey hain nu. And the word is Eloheinu. Now, in Hebrew, we often will have prefixes and suffixes added to a word to add meaning. The word El is God, or Eloah with a hey on the end is God. Nu, the ending nu is ours. So Eloheinu is our God. One word, but in English you have to have two words to have what we have in Hebrew. That's why often you'll have a Hebrew line and it takes several lines in English to translate it. Because Hebrew likes to have prefixes and suffixes added to words. And that takes care. In modern Hebrew, they have gotten away from some of that. The prefixes are still there, but they often use the longer form of the possessive instead of saying Elo. Well, I don't think they always say Elohinu, but Batenu is our houses. But Batot Shalanu is another way of saying our houses. Batim Shalanu, excuse me, is a Batim. Batim Shalanu, our houses. Ben is a son. Beni is my son. Ben Shali, my son. Right? Biblical Hebrew likes to shorten it. Modern Hebrew has gone back to often to longer forms. Okay, now we have the letter Mem. We had N, and now we have M. Just like the N, Nun is the equivalent of the letter N in English. The letter Mem is the equivalent of M in English on page 19. Okay, so if it's the one on the right-hand side, that's the letter as it appears at the beginning or middle of a word. The left-hand side where it's a square, it's squared off. Not to be confused with the letter Samech, the S, which is an S sound. Here you have clearly four corners. Yeah? But that will only appear at the end of the word. If you think you see that letter anywhere but at the end of the word, it's the other letter. You're just making a mistake. Or somebody that has misprint, that happens too. Okay, so the letter Mem, we have on line number 1, we have Ma, Me, Me, My, May, Mo, Mu. Line 2, Mem, Mame, Bam, Lame, Rem, Mu, Mum. Line 3, Mutar, Marat, Teiman, Heyman, Limain. Line 4, Lamum, Bameh, Rubam, Yoram, Beirut. Line 5, Nelech, Nelcha, Halom, Telem, Lechem. Line 6, Milacha, Mala'ah, Terem, Teruma, Ne'eman. Line 7, Harmon, Bahai, Rabotai, Ramban, Hana'ah. And the last word on the page is Melech, which means king. And God is called king. So the beginning of every bracha, let's look at the top of the page there. You should be able to read all of that, right? We have Baruch, Atah, Adonai, Eloheinu, Melech. Okay, so the end of Ha'olam is a mem sound. So we're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, on page 20, we have a letter that most people do not pronounce anymore. The letter ayin is treated for the most part just like the letter aleph, but just like the letter aleph used to have a sound, the ayin is really a guttural ayin in the back of your throat down here. Jews who come from Arabic-speaking lands retain the ayin. But you go to synagogues here, unless you hear somebody's an Israeli or Moroccan background or have you, you will not hear them pronounce the ayin. Right? But it really did. And the place where things are going on right now in Israel, what's the name of that territory? Gaza. What's it in Hebrew? Aza. Aza. The because it's hard to say that become in English became a G sound. Aza becomes Gaza. But here Israelis will pronounce it as Aza. Okay, so we treat it just like we treat the aleph, though. So if you don't want to have to worry about making that sound, don't worry about it whatsoever. I sometimes pretend that I know how to do it, and so I try, so that when I say Shema, I try to get the ayin in there. We'll talk about Shema and Echad later on in the year. Okay, so ayin, like aleph, is a silent letter. Just know that that's a lie. Okay, put a little, parenthesis around it. Well, we'll pretend it's a silent. Okay. So line number 1, we have a, o, e, I, a, e. Line number 2, al, or, ra, or, be, 3, Allah, ole, ola, or, ne'elam. 4, aram, me'or, ro'eh, ulam, and nud. 5, elul, achbar, moreh, Morah, Alu. 6, Na'ama, Anan, Noam, Lima'an, Lima'ancha. Now, the word ha'olam has different shades of meaning. It can mean this world, or it can mean eternity. I don't know why it's the same word is used for both concepts. Maybe because in the ancient world, eternity, the world was seen, that's it. All right. But as you see in the translation, blessed are you, Adonai God, ruler of the universe. That's how it's usually understood there. Not just this world here, but all worlds. So let's read the whole beginning of the bracha. We've already started that. So we say, Baruch atah Adonai El Melech Haolam. That's what my grandson does. He does a bracha. They start with Baruch atah Adonai. He's got all the second part. The older one, the both of them now. The little one, she's too young for that. She's just over a year. Okay. Line number 1 on page 21. This is a review of everything that we've gotten to so far, which could appear on a test, by the way. Line number 1, we have hu, yo, lo, ol, telem, rotem, omer. Line 2, becha, bach, orcha, orech, he'am, amen. Anybody know what the word amen means?
So be it.
So be it, in truth, faithfully. But that's the English word amen. Right? They don't translate. Amen is almost never translated. Just anglicized to amen or amen, depending upon your accent. All right. There was a great song when I was young. Amen. 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 Everybody, amen. Yeah, everybody know. It was a pop song. All right, line number 3. No neum Elohechem alai ola. 4, arba'a aleinu aleichem ole. 5. Milacha bame romemu holech holechet. Line number 6. Tai umetai boche otam otchem. 7. Otanu umora haran yoram I Adonai. 8. Nelech Torah umatan matana alechem. 9. Natan lanu et Torato emet. 10. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Natan Lanu et Torato Torat emet. Okay, that's a Sephardi way of saying Torato Torat emet. So that line number 9 is part of a blessing. Asher Natan Lanu Torato. When we say a blessing for study of Torah, you're called up to the Torah for an aliyah. Should we do? No, we'll stop here. So now we'll stop at that point. Okay, so we finished the review.
No, I don't like the game. The one was a straight line, which confuses.
Said
So remember, if you get confused with the final form versus the initial form of a letter, usually the final form takes the bottom and pulls it down.
Mhm.
Because the letter mem, it pulls it down. All right. I mean, well, no matter, not mem, the nun. I mean, the letter nun, instead of going straight across, it pulls it down. The chaf, it's like a C, a backward C. And the bottom, it pulls it down. So that's all, many of the times with the difference between the final and the initial letter is the bottom gets pulled down. You'll see that's almost all of them. Tzadi's that way. All right. Okay. Last week we started talking about kashrut. You remember? And just a real quick review. We have the animals that are kosher. They have to have cloven hoofs, chew their cud. If they live in water, they have to have fins and scales. There are various birds that are deemed kosher and others that are not. There's no clear way of knowing. And those of you who looked at that list of kosher and non-kosher fish, if you can recognize all of them, wonderful. Yes.
There's one in particular. I'm not sure if barracuda was on there, but that was always have to
Barracudas,
be cautious with barracuda because its flesh is poisonous.
yeah, and barracuda are not kosher, if I recall correctly.
Oh, they are.
They are? I don't remember.
They are, but they're poisonous. Their flesh is poisonous.
Flesh is poisonous.
Yes.
Okay, well, if it's poisonous, you don't want to eat it anyway.
I looked it up. I was like,
Okay, well,
yes,
I don't know. What can I tell you?
I don't eat it.
Yeah, all right. So all shellfish and all those wonderful things are not kosher. All right. We don't worry about grasshoppers these days. Maybe a couple generations we'll go back to it, but right now we don't worry about grasshoppers. And remember that there are certain elements, mostly found on the larger cattle, but on cattle and on sheep and goats. There's certain parts of the hindquarters are not eaten, certain fats and sinews. So that's why today, for the most part, North America, you only get front quarters of the animal. You will not get the hindquarters of an animal in kosher trade. All right. Go to Israel, you can find it. All right. Now, as I mentioned last week, the Torah says 3 times, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. You will not cook, meaning cook with liquid, a goat or a young goat in its mother's milk. So because it's repeated 3 times, the rabbis, if you ever get around to learning Talmud, you will see that anything that's strange or seems extra or repetitive, it isn't. It's always there for a reason. So since we're already told once not to cook a kid in its mother's milk, why do we need to be told 2 more times? Maybe because we're deaf? No. Okay, so the rabbi said you're not allowed to cook meat and milk. You're not allowed to consume meat and milk. You're not allowed to have any benefit from a mixture of meat and milk. For example, if I said there are non-kosher parts of the animal, if I have a dog and I want to feed those non-kosher parts to my dog, I can do so. But if I cook a cheeseburger, now I have to throw it out. I can have no benefit from it whatsoever, even giving it to my dog. I wouldn't even be allowed to give it to my non-Jewish neighbor because that's an act that, it creates friendship, what have you. And that's giving me a benefit. All right, so, and the last thing is that the rabbis said that fowl, F-O-W-L, are treated like meat when it comes to consumption with dairy products. Fish, on the other hand, and all vegetables are neutral, or in Hebrew, parv, meaning they can be used with either milk or meat, but we generally traditionally don't consume fish and meat together. All right. So now we're going to get into an area that Rabbi Allen and I, when we were learning this together, called the physics of Kashrut. Physics has laws. The physics of Kashrut has laws of Kashrut physics. It has nothing to do with science. It's just the rules and regulations. And we live with them, even if we don't always understand them. So let's start with a basic premise. If I cook something on a utensil, let's say a pot, take my pot and I put it on the stove, and the pot is hot. There's nothing else in it right now, okay? I put a piece of meat into that pot, and the meat starts to cook. Now, 2 things are happening simultaneously. One, the meat is cooking, but also meat molecules get absorbed into the walls of the pot. Another way, the meatiness gets into the walls of the pot, whatever metaphor or simile you want to use. But the rabbis in the Talmud use the word tam, taste, and that's important, as we'll come back to it in a minute. The taste of the meat enters into the walls of the pot. That's what makes a pot meat, or in Yiddish, fleshig, basari in Hebrew. You go to the store and you buy a aluminum pot, it's nothing, just a piece of metal that's you can cook with. It's neither meat nor milk. It's really parv in that sense. Okay? It becomes a meat utensil when it is hot enough to cook an item. Thomas says that temperature is yad solet bo. If you put your hand on it and you automatically jerk away because it's too hot for you to leave your hand there, that's cooking temperature. And when you cook, whatever is being cooked gives some of its taste, its tam, into the pot. So the next time I use that pot, some of the absorbed molecules, taste, will come out. However, it's absorbed is the way it's taken out. So if I took a cup of milk and I put it into that meat pot that's hot, some of the meat that was in the walls of the pot is mixing with the milk in the pot, thus rendering it a mixture of meat and milk, which is not kosher. and I'd have to throw it out. We're on the same page right now? Important concept, how the flavor is absorbed is the way the flavor comes out. So when I want to cook meat, I have to have pots that are used only for meat. When I want to have dairy, I use pots that are only used for dairy. If I get them mixed up, that's where problems come in. So that's for stage one. Stage number two. I want to cook some broccoli. I've checked it out. I don't see any bugs. My wife and I, we eat fresh broccoli. We take a look at it, make sure there are no bugs hanging around. Some won't even eat. Anyway, broccoli is what? Is it meat? It's parve. So I put some water into my pot, and I put my broccoli into that water, and I boil it. What happens? If it is a meat pot, one might be afraid that some of the meat molecules get into the broccoli. Or if it's a dairy pot, vice versa, all right? The fact of the matter is, according to the strict rule of the Talmud, that's not a problem. Strict rule of the Talmud, the example given, if I cook a fish in a fleishik pan, I'm allowed to have a dairy sauce on it. But generally speaking, we don't do that. Technically, it would not be a problem, but to be sure and be extra careful, we don't do that. Once, you talk to, once you get established and all of that, then you talk to your rabbi about, can you use some vegetable for something else after you've cooked them? But right now, just assume they become whatever pot they were cooked in. But know that because they're not really meat, or they're not really dairy, if you make a mistake and mix it up with the other flavor in some way, you don't have to worry about it. Okay? I had my broccoli, I cooked it in my meat pot, didn't realize it was the meat pot. I don't know, it was one of those days. Friday was like that in my household. And I had it with my cheeseburger, not cheeseburger. I had it with my pizza that I had tonight. Gluten-free. Okay. Don't worry about it. End of story. Don't worry about it. Okay. Now let's say we have the following situation. I'm getting ready for Shabbos. So I'm cooking chicken soup. And my wife, bless her, she puts the chicken soup in, she cooks it to death. So it has a really good soup. Okay. I'm going to make it a beef broth just to make it even more clear. Because with the chicken, there's some leeway. But let's say I make a nice beef broth. None of the meat's in there. There's no meat floating around. But there is the meat broth that's clearly meat. And my little grandson, who was drinking his glass of milk, comes over and looks in the pot, and all of a sudden some milk dribbles out, either from the cup or from the mouth, whichever you prefer, and lands in the soup. What do I do? Any suggestions? Guys are all cowards. Okay, that's the easy answer. You throw it out.
Dump it.
What? Dump it.
Throw it out.
That depends on how much. Now, remember I started off by it said the rabbis in the Talmud use the word tam, taste. If you can't taste something, it's as if it's not there. There's no taste, there's nothing to it. And so what if you cannot taste, let's say the milk in this case, I cannot taste the milk in that pot of soup, beef broth, it shouldn't be a problem. Because it's as if it's not there. Can't taste it, it's not there. So you go back a couple of thousand years ago, and the answer was this poor Jewish housewife goes to her next door neighbor, and her next door neighbor is an excellent expert cook. And she says to her next door neighbor, expert neighbor cook, would you taste my soup and tell me what the ingredients are in it? And he tastes it and he says, well, there's a 3-year-old calf in here, some onions, some garlic, some salt. Oh yeah, and there's a little bit of taste of milk. Thank you very much. You go to your backyard and you dump it. If he says he leaves out the milk, he doesn't taste, I said he, she, whatever, doesn't taste the milk, there's no taste. Since there's no taste, it's as if it's not there. How many of you live next door to a non-Jewish expert cook who could tell you whether or not a drop of milk fell into your meat soup? Anybody? I dare say no one here. So the rabbis decided not to rely on that, but they basically said the following: if I have an accident and I mix liquid of one kind with the other, milk in the soup, if the amount of the soup is 60 times more than the amount of the milk, it is nullified in 60. Batel b'shishim. Because it's as if it's not there. I mean, the reality of the world is, right, things are flying around in the world all the time. My daughter-in-law, my oldest son, she's really stringent. Believe me, you're not going to have any problems in her house. She won't even let things being cooked in the same room. All right, separate refrigerators, the whole works. But nonetheless, you're cooking. This stuff's going to be in the air. Molecules float around. Some of that milk is going to float around. Some of these bugs that you can't see are going to be floating around. How many bugs we eat without knowing it, who knows? But that's the reality. So we have to have a limit. So the rabbi said, if it is liquid mixed with liquid, 60 times is the magic number. Yes.
You were saying that if you put milk in a pan, you have to throw the pan away.
No, I didn't say the pan. I didn't say anything about the pan.
Oh, okay.
We haven't talked about the pan yet.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
I'll hit my wife over the head with a pan. No. We just bought it. We just bought a new what was that? I don't know, but she had to go all these stores and she had to see if she could lift them, be sure there was a Dutch oven kind of thing. Okay. She didn't get the $800 one, thank God. Anyway, she couldn't lift it. We'll come back. This is all tied in with that idea. Okay? So right now we're just talking about the soups get mixed up. If it's more than 1 part in 60 to 60, if it's 2, 3, 4, then you got to throw it out, and you can have no benefit from it. Okay, what if it's solid? Let us say I have in front of me 2 kosher hot dogs and 1 non-kosher hot dog, and they're identical in look. And I guess they'll be identical in taste too, let's say, for argument's sake. Now, how I have 1 non-kosher hot dog and 2 kosher hot dogs there, I don't know. But I did. Not only did I do that, but the dog came running by, hit the table, the plate that one was on and the other, they both flew off in the air. They landed on the floor, 3-second rule. I pick them all up and put them back on the plate. Which is which? I had 3 hot dogs. I have 3 hot dogs. One of them I know isn't kosher. 2 of them I know is kosher. What do I do?
Feed the dog.
The dog gets dinner, that you could do that. But these are very expensive hot dogs. At least the kosher ones were. It was a cheap treif one. I don't know. I bought it for the dog. There are different opinions on what you have to do. Strictly speaking, there's a concept in solids of batel barov. The majority overrules the minority. The majority of 2 versus a minority of 1. So the identity of the 1 disappears. And theoretically, I can eat all 3 hot dogs, not at the same time. Because if I chose to eat them all 3 together, definitely I'm eating a treif hot dog. Right? But if I do it one at a time, maybe the one I'm picking up is one of the kosher hot dogs, and the 2 that are left, one's kosher, one's not kosher. The next hot dog I pick up, I don't know if it's kosher or not kosher. Similarly with the third. Some are stringent, say you have to throw one away. Okay? Because you've got these doubts. Is the one that I'm throwing away, is that the kosher hot dog or is it the non-kosher hot dog? So I throw it away and then I rely that the other 2 are kosher and go on with my life. Right? Just don't get into that situation and you're okay. Right? But the rabbis are talking about a world in which things, we think our world is complicated. Sometimes life gets more complicated when you have less complications. Things going on, people together with each other, what have you. So when it is a mixture of solid items, if you have a majority, you can assume the minority disappears, as it were. There's a whole, believe me, it's much more complicated arguments there. What happens is it disappeared? Does it lose its nature? What have you? But you could safely go by the opinions that you throw one away and you can eat the other 2. Again, you shouldn't eat them simultaneously. Okay, there's always that level of doubt. Now, let us say, goes back to our soup. We'll stick with the beef broth. But I got some chunks of meat in it. Now the milk spills, but it lands on, or a piece of cheese lands on top of one of the chunks of chunks of meat that's floating in the pot. If I'm quick and pay attention, I get that piece of meat out, throw it away, we're okay. Right? Because now it's a mixture of solid and liquid, and those creates its problems. If I'm not thinking, and I stirred it because I was busy stirring while I was doing everything, I live with it. So if I can identify which piece of meat it fell on, I get rid of that piece of meat, and that's the end of the story there. All of this is based on the concept of taste. And all of this is based on the concept of accident. All of this must be unintentional. I can't say I've got 60 ounces of meat soup and I want to put in a half an ounce of milk into my soup. Ain't going to work, Charlie. In that case, it's treif. It's no good. Now, the question comes up in manufacturing as to whether or not when manufacturers do something like that, whether or not we consider that to be nullified. And if we're putting in for the taste, if the reason you put something in is because you think it gives taste to the food, then you are assuming it affects the taste. If it affects the taste, then it's not good. It may be tasty, but you can't use it. And I'm not the different one of the things that define the different agencies that give kosher supervision is how they deal with some of these issues. Not 1 in 60, because nobody's going to permit 1 in 60, but let's say it's 1 in 1,000. Or let's go back to our vegetable. Now, since what we have is the following. We have a meat pot. The meat pot's been made meat because it's absorbed the taste of the meat. I put water in the pot and I started boiling. And I put a vegetable in it. So now the assumption is, on the kashrut rule, is that the taste of the meat that was in the pot goes out of the pot, swims through the water, jumps on the vegetable, and chokes it to death, making it meat. Okay? The rabbis weren't so quick on that. There's an expression, notein tam bar notein tam. The meat gives the meat flavor into the walls of the pot. Now, that's no longer the original taste. That's the son or daughter, offspring of the original taste. And then that offspring comes out of the walls of the pot and goes into the vegetable. That's notein tam bar notein tam in the Talmud. And they say, really, it doesn't count. That's why in push comes to shove, if you did that, you could use it, okay, for the other flavor. But now let us say I have my meat pot and I'm going to make wacky mac. You know what wacky mac is?
Yeah.
Okay, wacky mac is the Jewish answer to Kraft macaroni and cheese. Okay, so I'm going to make wacky mac for my grandchildren, and I boil up the noodles, which is no big deal, and then I put in some butter. After I take the noodles out, I put some butter, I have some milk, and I take the cheese, and then I put the noodles back in, and I stir it all up. Uh-oh, that was my meat pot. The dairy molecules entered into the walls of the meat pot, got married to the meat molecules that were in the walls of the pot, creating a mixed marriage of meat and milk. You should part of the expression. Okay? So now the pot is not kosher, because when I cook next, I'm going to be exuding meat and milk together. Now, if that was a pot that became the way it is as a result of something cooking in water, how did the meatiness get into it? It got in through the water, into the walls of the pot. How can I take that out of it? By boiling it in another pot. So let us say I have a small saucepan, and I made that mistake. And I take my big chicken soup pot. And that pot that I made rendered unusable, I let it sit for 24 hours. And if you leave anything sitting out in the air in 24 hours, especially in Israel or anywhere in the Middle East, what is it going to taste like in 24 hours? That piece of meat. Right? No time gone. It's going to be a terrible taste. Not something you want to deal with. So the taste that's now left in the pot is called tam leaf gum, a bad flavor. So I can take that pot, put it into boiling water that's bigger than that pot. And the boiling water pulls out whatever taste was left in that pot, and the pot becomes a newborn pot. In theory, you could use it for if you wanted it for dairy, you can use it for dairy. If you want to use it for meat, you can use it for meat, but preferably you stick with whatever it was. Okay. If your pot is so big that you can't put it into another pot, like the soup pot that I use the kosher with, both of them, by the way, shouldn't be used for 24 hours in advance. Excuse me. I fill it as high as I can with water. I get the water boiling. I take a piece of metal or I take a rock and get it hot. And very carefully, avoiding my hands and feet, I drop the rock into the pot. The water spills over, makes a nice mess, but it flows over the top of the pot. And that's how I kosher the pot. Cutlery, if it's solid metal, you boil a pot of water that, the pot's not been used 24 hours. You get the water boiling, you put the cutlery in it, let it stay in for a few seconds, pull it out, try it off, rinse it off, and you're done. Some of you may have heard that you have to plant it in your garden first. You ever hear that? The trape garden, the gardens with forks, and people think Jews grow forks out of their gardens. That's probably because the way they had to clean items in 2,000 years ago was not as good as the soap and stuff we have today. And they would put it into hard earth to get the grease off. That was the real purpose of putting it into the ground, not to raise little baby knives. Okay, so we don't do that with our cutlery today. Yes.
Now, the pot we're taking it off in, does it need to be a milk pot or a meat pot? I guess we should be trying to use a pot that was for its original purpose.
That's what I said. Better to do that because you're going to get more confused if you don't.
Yeah, because then if I use a meat pot, it's bigger than for my milk pot, and then it's a whole nother
Well,
restart.
theoretically, let us say the only big pot you have is a meat pot, and you want to kosher a dairy pot that got problems with it. If you left the meat pot not used for over 24 hours, then and let the problem pot sit for 24 hours in a corner, facing the wall, so it gets its punishment. None of this is in this Talmud. Then you could use it. All right, it's if you better if you have something else, but yeah, you can use it again because the concept is the taste that's in the pot is what we call tam lifgan, and so we frown upon going back and forth, making a pot dairy, making a pot milk of meat, back and forth. If it is something that is cooked just with heat, say you have a roasting pan. The way that has to be koshered is with heat. Because how did it absorb the whatever flavor it got into it? From dry heat, not the intervention of a liquid. So some say, well, one way, if you want to take your life into your hands, you can blowtorch it. Or if you have a self-cleaning oven, wash the pot, let it sit 24 hours, put it in your oven that you're going to do self-cleaning and hope the pot doesn't get ruined. If you're going to blowtorch it, it'll probably get ruined also, so I don't know what else you're going to do. If you have a grill, you broil on the grill, same thing. It's got to be heated, ideally till it's white hot, and if you put a piece of paper on it, it catches fire. All right? But again, if you want, I rely on the self-cleaning ovens because I think that gets it hot enough. Similarly, if you move into a new home and there's already a stove there, if it's a self-cleaning, clean it out, let it sit 24 hours, turn it on to its self-cleaning for a couple hours. When that's finished, clean it out again and do it again just to be sure. If the top burners, if it's an electric stove, and it's the old-fashioned way with the circular kinds of things, you get it red hot and that takes care of it. If it's one of these glass-topped ones that I have now, talk to somebody about it. There are issues involved. Okay, you might be able to just turn it on and get it hot, and just be careful about using the sides. Now, all of this is talking about transference of taste when it's hot. If something is cold, it's not said to transfer taste. So let us say I pull out my meat plate, put it on the counter, and I'm thinking I put a hunk of cheese on it. Plate's cold, the cheese is cold, the house is cold, it's the middle of the winter. No, right? I take the cheese off. I wipe the cheese off to make sure that there was nothing on the plate that got onto it. Wash the plate carefully, and everybody's okay. If the plate was hot, you're one of those people like to serve their food on a hot plate, and then you stuck the cheese on it, now you got a problem. And the problem comes into the area of pottery, porcelain, these items. Do they absorb? Yes, that's what the rabbinic tradition is. They absorb flavor, just like a pot metal absorbs flavor. But you can't boil it to get the flavor out, because if you boil the pot, the plate, it'll break. At least prior to modern utensils. And then it comes to some of these other kinds of plates, Melmac, and there are all kinds of positions on this. Talk to your rabbi if you have a problem. Some say it's okay, some say it's not. Glass is said not to absorb. Some will have glass with both milk and meat, the same glasses, being careful to wash them very carefully, or you have separate glasses of meat and milk so you don't have to worry about it. We will visit all of this when we come back to Pesach time, because that's going to be an issue that pops up there as well. Now, ideally, the ideal kitchen is what we fell into when we just bought our condominium. We have 2 sinks on one side of the kitchen and 2 sinks on the other side of the kitchen. One side is dairy and one side is meat. We have a microwave for the dairy. We have a microwave for the meat. We have an oven for the meat, and we bought a microwave, doubles up with a broiler or whatever they call that thing, air fryer, whatever. There's a question about using the same oven for both milk and meat. Why? The problem is, let's take you're making a roast. I know in this day and age, you can't afford too many roasts, so it's a special occasion when you're cooking a kosher roast. So you're cooking it. There is steam. There's no question there's steam, and that steam contains grease. All you have to do is look at the stove after you're through cooking in it. Right? Now, if I then decide to cook a dairy casserole in that same oven, there's going to be steam, and it's going to hit the sides, and the sides are going to come back down into the dairy. So if you aren't lucky enough to be able to have 2 full ovens, you can use the same oven, but one of the flavors has to always be covered. If you're going to use it mainly for meat cooking, then if you cook something that's dairy in it, it has to be covered. Your casserole has to be covered in aluminum foil or something like that, because that prevents anything dripping into it. And similarly, if you don't have 2 sinks, one ideal way is to put a dish pan in the sink, or put something on the bottom of the sink so that the dishes don't sit on the sink itself, on the surface of itself, when you wash the dishes that way. And ideally, you have one section where you deal with your meats products and one section where you deal with your dairy products. And if you want to cut up vegetables and you want to put them in the refrigerator and use them at any time, preferably use a knife that's not used for milk or meat. Because a knife creates heat. Maybe not a lot, but if you've ever tried sawing something, right, it gets hot. Is it enough to cook? It's a question. So if you're going to be cutting up vegetables and you want to be able to eat them with whatever meal you're going to have, so you use your parve knife and your parve cutting board, and you put it in a parve utensil or plastic bag, right? And you take out what you want for when you want it. Yes.
What about a dishwasher? What would be the rules behind that?
Difference of opinion.
Oh.
There are differences of opinion. The most lenient says you can use it for both. That there is an opinion to that effect. Some would say you have to run a cycle between them. Just an empty cycle between them to clear it all out. I know because recently I've cleaned out the filters of both of my dishwashers. I don't think I'd be comfortable using the dishwasher for both. Right, certainly not right away, one after the other, because there's schmutz that collects in the filters, and then the water's bubbling up maybe from that. But there is an opinion that permits it. The more stringent would not. Again, I'm fortunate we have two dishwashers. Before that, we had two dishwashers too. There was the meat dishwasher, and then there were my hands and my wife's hands, and our hands are parve. And we use gloves anyway, so it makes, all right. But again, if you made a mistake and you put your washing in the sink, all right, and you put your dairy utensils mixed up with your meat utensils, just rinse them off, and clean them. It's not a problem because it's not hot enough. Well, unless you have really hot water in there. You have really hot water in it, then you're out of luck. But generally speaking, you're not going to have water so hot that it would be able to cook something. You can put your hands into it at least for a little bit of time. Yatzledabo means if you touch it, you almost have no choice. Your hand jerks away. It's a natural reflex. Yatzledabo, the hand jumps away from it. That's according to some, that's a cooking temperature. Okay, so the same holds true when we're talking about it for Pesach, for the dishwasher for Pesach. The same issues arise, and depends upon the opinion that you follow in that. Now, one issue that I haven't talked about, some of the nicer things in life have alcohol in them, unless you're a teetotaler, which is fine too. Most hard liquors, rye, scotch, my favorite bourbon, are generally speaking no problem. The question comes up, which I will come back to in a minute. Let's go to the area where there are questions, and that's wine. The simple answer, the rabbis said that if wine was used for idolatrous purposes, a Jew is not allowed to drink that wine. Once the wine was used as a libation to a god, a foreign god, that renders the wine not kosher. And in the ancient world, part of the process of making wine, generally speaking, was to pour a libation to the god of agriculture, whatever it was, for the wine should come out good and be able to sell in the market for $500 a bottle or whatever. Okay? That was called Yayin Nesach. Yayin Nesach means wine that was used for a libation. Okay? So the rabbi said such wine is forbidden for consumption and even benefit to a Jew. Now, later on, as history rolls by a bit, wine was not necessarily used. Not every wine that was made by non-Jews was used for libation. But there were a number of rabbinic enactments that, real quite honest, was to try and promote endogamy, to prevent Jews from marrying outside the Jewish people. Okay? There are clearly a number of laws in our tradition that were designed for that reason. And one of them is what we call stam yenim, any wine. Any wine that was handled by a Gentile during the production of that wine, the rabbis forbade a Jew to consume. They could have maybe benefit from it, but they were not allowed to consume. Why? Because what was the drink in the ancient world? That when you got together and you had a party and everything else, what did you drink? Wine. And so very clearly the rationale for it was to make a separation. And part of the Kashrut laws serve the same purpose. It's very hard to marry somebody outside the Jewish world if you can't eat with them and you can't drink with them. How are you going to get together with them? That's the reality. So wine, even till today, according to traditional Orthodox practice, wine produced by non-Jewish sources is considered to be not kosher. If it is produced only by Jews, then it can be considered to be kosher. Now, there's some caveats here. For example, if you go to Israel, I don't know too many places here in the States, in North America rather, that produce wine, although there's one down in Niagara, nice wine. Even if you are Jewish, but you don't have the right passport in the eyes of the mashgiach, you can't even touch the outside of the barrels, Jew or Gentile. Okay? Nobody touches it except ones that make their mark of approval. And they usually have to have payas down to here, and it's just dragging on the floor. Okay? So they preserve it that way. But once it is bottled, or once it is sealed in a cask, although most wines are bottled, they take them out of the cask and bottle it. So we're basically talking about bottled wine. Once it is bottled, anybody can handle it. But if it is opened, then you get into questions. So now getting back to our original premise that the original reason for forbidding the wines was for idolatrous purposes, not to stop Jews and non-Jews from sharing a nice glass of sherry together. Wine that was boiled, the rabbi said, would not be used for libations. It just was not, it's pasnished. The gods wanted only good quality wine. The best quality wine is not boiled in any way. It's not pasteurized. It is left raw. So a lot of kosher wines will be labeled mevushal. Mevushal means they've been heated enough to act of pasteurization, which helps preserve it, but also kills some of the bacteria that help age wine. So if you go to a kosher function and you see waiters pouring wine, you know that the wine they are pouring is mevushal. It's wine that has been pasteurized, heated to a certain temperature. I don't know what it is right offhand. And then it's okay. If it is not mevushal, and some of the finer quality kosher wines are not mevushal, then it depends on how strict you're going to be. Okay? it's a takana, it's a gezeir, it's a fence around the basic rule. It's sort of, most very traditional minded people will not allow somebody who's not Jewish at all to handle non-mavushal wine, and they sometimes won't allow other Jews who they know are not very observant to handle the wine either. We talked about milk last week, right? Didn't we? Did we? Yes, milk?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit of milk. Okay, we were talking about that in milk dairy products. So now getting back to our liquors, the question came up that some scotches were being aged in sherry barrels. The barrel had been used to make some sherry, and it was considered to be a way of making that scotch taste better. And they would advertise aged in sherry barrels. Since they thought it gave a taste to it and made it better, there are some rabbinic authorities that said any liquor that was aged in a barrel that had been used previously for wine was not to be regarded as kosher. I don't hold by that. There's a lot of reason for disagreeing with that opinion, but that is out there. And then it comes to these liqueurs, and all kinds of things in liqueurs. So you have to know whether or not they're kosher ingredients, not in kosher ingredients, and difference of opinion, how strict you have to be on that. Most of the kosher world will only use liqueurs that have a rabbinic supervision. Now for the last little bit, the scandalous part of the evening, kosher supervision. To be honest with you, to some degree, kosher supervision is a travesty. Why do I say that? Let's take a piece of broccoli. You don't need a rabbi to tell you that it's a vegetable. Okay? And in a small town, all the Jews there, they had their garden plots, or they knew their neighbor, their non-Jewish neighbor's garden plot, and they know how they harvested their vegetables. They weren't worried about it. And if you had an inn in town, and it was a kosher inn, and people knew that you were a Jew who observed kashrut, and you had a good reputation, people ate there. Even the rabbi of the community might eat there. Comes to slaughtering animals, okay, there's certain issues and questions, so you have to have some kind of supervision to make sure that the shochteim know what they're doing, and they always shecht properly. So that's always had a certain degree of supervision. But as the Jewish world entered into the modern era, and all kinds of turmoil and strains and things like that, more and more became de rigueur. That's a nice Yiddish word, right? To have somebody supervising your operation that they could say, I can attest to the fact that this is kosher. Now, in some circumstances, it's not a big deal. The rabbi who does it, he pokes his nose in, looks around, says it's okay. Goodbye, Charlie. But let's take Kraft or Heinz or any of these huge operations. Well, first of all, there's a lot going on in their factories. So, and if you're going to rely on the manufacturer, forget it. So if you want to make sure a can of baked beans is not pork and beans, and it doesn't get mixed in with the line that makes the pork and beans and the dairy, the vegetarian beans, and they're not cooked together in the same big unit, somebody has to check it out. That's time, that's money. The manufacturer, in general, will pay money to the supervising rabbi who will attest to the fact that this is kosher. It's his time. He's got to be paid for his time. And so, and as the operations get bigger, it becomes more requiring more people involved, bigger organizations that you can rely upon. And then there are people out there that maybe are careful and are not careful. And they say, I'll give you supervision. And if you give me a couple of dollars extra, I won't bother you as often. Unfortunately, that's reality. I mean, rabbis are people, only more so. There are good rabbis, and then there are scoundrels. And we know that in every profession in the world. And then sometimes they're just accidents. When I was a rabbi in El Paso, Texas, I was the only rabbi that could deal with any of this stuff. There was no Orthodox rabbi. I had a reputation for being a shomer mitzvot. I popped into the bakery every once in a while and take a look to be sure everything is okay. And that's the rule. You can come and go. You don't have to be there 24 hours, 6 days a week. He was probably open 7, but what can you do in a small town in El Paso, Texas? All right. So I would check his ingredients and see that they were okay. One day I came in. I said, okay, let me see what you've got. And he shows me he's got 4 containers, box containers, cardboard containers for oil. One said pure vegetable. One had a hechsher on it. I know it was OU. I think it was OU. Well, Union of Orthodox Congregations. No problem. The next one, I may have had a K on it. I have no idea how and why they had a K on it. Who said it was kosher or not? I have no way of knowing. A third said pure vegetable oil. I don't know. Can I rely on that? What else is going on? And the fourth was takatreif. Okay? So only one of the 4 oils could I find acceptable. And even in the best of operations, things happen. You know, you run out of ingredients in the kitchen, and they send somebody down to the store to buy something, and they're not careful, and they buy something that's not kosher or has dairy in it, or whatever. Those things happen even under the best of operations. But because money is involved, and sometimes lots of money is involved, money brings corruption. It may not be the root of all evil, but certainly it causes a lot of it. And I'll share with you a good friend of mine, who is really into kashrut. We went to school together. He was a conservative rabbi, but believe me, he knew the laws in and out better than 99% of the Orthodox rabbis around. And this was in Staten Island, and there was a bakery there, and the rabbi went in one time. He was buying. I don't know exactly why he wasn't supervising, right? But he saw something, and he told his congregants, "You can't buy from that bakery." And he got a visit from some guy, about 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide, and several hundred pounds more than he weighed, and fists like, who convinced him, keep your nose out of it. Yeah, you have some of that around. So that's one of the reasons why we try to rely on the organizations that we know are reliable. The Circle K, the OU, the Star K, the Couch K, and our local one, which is Core. Are they perfect? No. Are they subject to mistakes? Of course. Going back, this is 45 years ago, 46 years ago, there was a wonderful product out in the market coming out of Chicago. We lived in Sioux City, Iowa at the time. They were frozen chicken breasts, and they were all kinds of. Sometimes they were stuffed with kishka. For those who know what kishka is, if you don't know, go learn Zilgamir. There was a parv, chicken Kiev. Oh, it was like 4 or 5 different wonderful things. Pop them in the oven, and you had a nice meal. Until the Mashgiach discovered they got in 5,000 pounds of chicken breasts, and they sent out 10,000 pounds of chicken breasts. Now, somehow 5 doesn't become 10. And they were bringing in non-kosher meat by, sneaking it in. Okay? And this was under supervision. And boy, it was a big to-do across the United States, because a lot of people had been buying this product because it was so nice. So that's it. And then there can be fights. Sometimes, different organizations have different rules that they follow. The major ones try to get together so that they are pretty much on the same page. But some are more lenient in this area, some are more stringent in that area. You go to Israel, you'll see even the rabbinate, which ostensibly is for everybody, has different rabbinic levels of hechsher. For example, in the United States, no one will allow you to use gelatin that comes from animal sourced. In Israel, they allowed you to have gelatin that was animal sourced based upon a ruling from Europe, a fine rabbi in Europe. But he is rejected by most of the rabbinic authorities in North America, including Rabbi Louis Ginsburg, who was at the seminary, the so-called conservative posek. And he says this guy was his relation. It was through his wife, and they were cousins or something. And he says he knows kashrut, but he doesn't know chemistry. Okay, and he went to a chemist that talked about it. All right, so he said it was no good. So now in Israel, with all the American right-wing Jews who went to Israel, they won't accept the level of kashrut that uses gelatin. So some will use it, and some won't. So there's a hechshers that say they use gelatin, and there's hechshers that they won't use gelatin. So that depends upon you. There are some that insist you have to have glatt kosher meat. And there are some who say you don't have to have glatt kosher meat. So that's up to you which one you want to go by. But all right, so those things, and sometimes they play nasty games with each other because they're people, and they want the business. And the poor manufacturers who sometimes get caught in the middle, the ones that are trying to be honest, the non-Jews are usually the best. The Jews think they know better than the rabbis, and they can sneak around them. But the non-Jewish manufacturers say, that's what the rabbi says. What am I going to do? All right. They sometimes pull tricks, but anyway, what I was going to say is that, let us say I'm Heinz, and I want to sell my product to as many Jewish customers. By the way, the kosher certification brings business far above and beyond the number of kosher Jews. For whatever reason, thank God, there are a lot of people out there in the world who think that if something is kosher, it's better. And as long as they believe that, I'm happy with it. Means I got more kosher things for me to eat. Okay? So it's big business to have a hechsher. You'll hear these people say, "Oh, there's a Jewish tax on the foods that you have to pay to the rabbis so that the manufacturer." No, the manufacturers say it costs me a part of a penny per product, and it gives me 15, 20 extra customers per item or whatever. So it's nothing like that. But let us say there's Rabbi A, Rabbi Berman. Rabbi Berman is a nice, his ordination is conservative. He's a nice guy, he's Shomer Shabbos, but he's a conservative rabbi. You can't really rely on him. But there's Rabbi Koropkin, who shall I go to? He's an Orthodox rabbi. So his hechsher, his imprimatur, is worth more than Rabbi Berman's imprimatur, because only those who trust Rabbi Berman will buy it with Rabbi Berman's imprimatur. But those who trust Rabbi Berman will also trust Rabbi Karobkin. But those who trust Rabbi Karobkin might not necessarily trust Rabbi Berman. So now by going to Rabbi Karobkin, you've increased your audience or your clientele. But Rabbi Karobkin is the rabbi of, quote, modern Orthodox synagogue. It's got mixed kinds of people in it. They're not all with black hats and long beards. And what are you going to do with a modern Orthodox rabbi like that? But Rabbi X, who went to the right yeshiva, and he's got the right length of beard, and he's got the right reputation. Those who listen, who follow Rabbi Karobkin, they'll accept his kosher signature as well. But those who follow him won't follow Rabbi Karobkin's, and those who follow Rabbi Karobkin won't follow Rabbi Berman's. So therefore, Rabbi X gets the deal. And that's why sometimes you'll see more than one hechsher on a product, because there are different audiences that want their rabbi or their thing to do it, and the manufacturers feel it's to their benefit to do so. But that, all right. Now, when it comes to the price of meat and chicken, not the vegetables, things like that, the kashrut thing is insignificant. It becomes significant more with even fish a little bit, but especially chicken and beef. First of all, when the animal is slaughtered, there's a clear understanding that a certain percentage of the animals that are slaughtered are going to be considered treif, no good, for whatever reason. Let us say, it's probably too low, but let's say 30%. So 30% of the animals that get slaughtered cannot be used. And then of the next 70%, during the processing, what have you, a certain number, something happens, what I give you, now you're down to 50%. So if you started with 100 cows who weighed 500 pounds a cow, and you only get the front half of the cow, so let's say it's 250 pounds, so you're down to 250 times 100. And of that 250 times 100, 1/3 is tossed out. So the cost goes up. You got to pay for the guys who does the job of slaughtering. You got to pay for the guys who rinse it and cut the meat and salt it so that it gets prepared that way, and packaged or whatever. And then it goes to the grocery store, it goes to the kosher butcher, and everybody's got a markup, which is reasonable, right? And it gets higher and higher. Some of them you have distribution networks, which raises the price. And on top of that, chickens, there's another issue with chickens. Chickens have to be plucked cold. If you go and buy any old non-kosher chicken, when they clean them, they use hot water to spray over the chicken's carcass. That makes the feathers easier to pull out by the machine. But that's hot enough temperature to be considered cooking. So you can't do that with kosher chickens. So they are cold water washed, and that's why they usually are a lot more feathers left on them. And then sometimes they pluck some of them off, some they don't. And then that especially is an issue of distribution, where the chickens are slaughtered and how they're distributed and how many. Somebody in Miami found chickens that came from Montreal cheaper than you could buy them in Montreal, kosher chickens. All right, because you're shipping them, but you're shipping them from Montreal or to Toronto or to Miami. You got to pay for the freight. And yet, when you buy it in the store in Montreal, even, it's a higher price than the way we're paying for it in Miami. Go figure that one out. And I'll leave you with one thing that going back to my El Paso stories. I have a few stories stored away. When I was in El Paso, I was asked twice to supervise a couple of places. One was a candy factory. He said, "There's just too much there. I don't know the ins and outs. I can't help you. I can't give you any hashgacha." The other was one of my congregants was a farmer, believe it or not. There were Jewish farmers in El Paso, Texas. And I had anyway, stay on the same story. So he knew this guy who said to him, wanted to know if the rabbi could come and look at the plant and give him a certification. So he came to me. He said, "I'll go look and see what I can do. I can write you a letter for whatever it's worth if it's time." So I look at what do? They cut up peppers and they put them in saltwater brine and ship them out. That's all they do. It's no big deal. It's not like there are lots of chemicals and lots of this and that. So I said, "All right, show me the rest of your operation. Then I can write you a letter saying I saw this and this is what I saw. And you can, if people accept it, they'll accept it. If not, not." So we go into the warehouse and there are these cardboard barrels. And on it is McCormick. We have McCormick spices here, right? And there's a big OU on the label on this thing. So I say to him, "Tell me, what do you use that for?" No, that's what we ship out. We put the peppers into that barrel and the label goes on it and it goes to McCormick. So you got a hechsher. You didn't even know it. I have no idea anybody knows that. I can't tell you the answer to that. I mean, it could be one, there's a failure on the OU part that they should have had somebody coming down there. It could be somebody's been there once before and he knows all they do is chop up peppers and put them in salt water. So, how often do you have to appear to supervise it? But that was the reality there. But that's the reality we deal with. So kashrut does cost more, I'm afraid. It has its ins and outs. You have responsibilities for what you do in your home. If you do your best and try to keep a kosher household, and somewhere prior to getting into your house, there's an issue, that's that person's problem. If you know about it, then you avoid it. But that's what happened when I said about this chicken thing. So the rabbi said, nobody knows for sure which chickens they got, if they got the kosher ones or not. So just wash off your utensils and go on with your life. And just assume that you got the kosher, just like with the hot dogs. All right? The one hot dog you picked up, that was the kosher hot dog. Any questions on any of this? We touched everything you need to know? Going to go home and have a kosher home, right? All right. Mm-hmm. If and when the time comes, talk to your supervising rabbi if you're ready to switch over. And like I said, the best thing to do is start with ingredients. Start making sure you only bring kosher ingredients into your home. Then make sure you separate your dishes. You make believe. These are my dairy. This is my meat. Well, I don't know what difference. So I put a piece of tape on the bottom of one of the plates. So I know that's a meat plate and that's a dairy plate. And then when you're ready to go the full way, there are people out there that will help you kosher your home if you want to. All right. So I hope that covers everything. And we will see each other next week. I will tell you later on, I'm going to be gone the middle of Hanukkah down to New York. So we will have that class. I think it's the 12th, 13th, I don't remember exactly, December, on Zoom. It'll be live from New York. Just not Saturday night. I did that a few years ago. My wife said, "You got to tell them it's live from New York." So I said, live. Okay, everybody. Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night.